Do you know what you do if you make a goal for yourself and you know you're not going to make it? The right answer is reassess to make that goal more attainable. But me, I just double down and go full steam ahead. Hello, I am JJ, and today I'm going to be talking about my February TBR. First, I wanted to start off with saying in my last video, I talked about my goals for the year. And what I found in the last month is, one, reading is really hard. It's between work, school, kids. I have a really hard time finding the time. So what I did is I looked at what I did, the goals that I made in that last video, and took a look at what was most important to me. So first I wanted to talk about what's changing. First off, as far as the Cosmere books, that Brandon Sanderson Stormlight Archive 4, The Rhythm of War, is coming out in November. I still want to, first and foremost, make sure I've read all the Cosmere books between now and November. So I took a look at what all the page counts were and determined 36 pages is what I need to read per day through all of the books in order to finish by October 31st. Gives me a little bit of a buffer in case I miss some days, but also gives me a little bit of break before we start diving into yet another 1,400 page book. Next is the thing I learned is I don't actually like historical fiction that much. So we're just taking that out completely. Then lastly, finding good self-published books is a little hard. So that's just kind of be as I find them, I'm gonna work them in. That's what's changing as far as my yearly goals. So without further ado, let's jump into the books that I'm gonna be reading for February. First up is Elantris, the first book that Brandon Sanderson published. It's the first book I'm starting in my year of reading Sanderson books. And so far I've really liked it. About halfway through almost. And the political intrigue as far as the three different characters, each character is in a very different position, and their approach to their situation as far as politically and how they're trying to influence those around them to make things better in their eyes is really interesting. There's a lot of different theories as far as that translate over to like the real world. That is definitely fun and interesting for me to consume and really think about. After Elantris, we're going to be reading the short story and novella related to that world in the Cosmere, The Hope of Elantris and The Emperor's Soul. Both of those loosely tie into the same world. They take on the same place. But overall, since they're related, we're just going to slide them in right after Elantris. After Elantris, we're going to start reading the Mistborn trilogy, starting with the Final Empire, or Mistborn, I guess they call it now. Mistborn's a story where, what if the chosen one, the person prophesied to take down the big bad guy, to bring peace throughout the land, what if that person failed? Now, 1,000 years later, the big bad evil person has been ruling over the land for 1,000 years, and that's where our story picks up. And it follows this ragtag group of people that are hopefully trying to take down the big bad, I assume. Next is High Fire by Owen Colfer. I was a really big fan of the Artemis Fowl books when I was a kid, and I was really excited when I found out that he had an adult fantasy book being published. It's interesting because when I read the back where all the blurbs from all the different authors and praise for him or for the book, there is one blurb about this book, and it says it's a fun, unusual contemporary fantasy. The rest are all just praises for his Artemis Fowl series, which kind of seems weird. I don't know if they just didn't get out enough to other people or how that all works, but I did find it really interesting that the praise for this book and for the author is very much related to his kid series. High Fire is about a dragon. He is the last dragon and is currently living in the bayous of Louisiana. I'm just gonna read this little blurb about him because that's what really sold me on this book. Lying low in the bayou, the once magnificent fire breather, Wyvern, Lord Highfire of the Highfire Eyrie, who struck fear in the hearts far and wide, is reduced to lighting Marlboros with nose sparks, swilling Absolute in a Flashdance t-shirt, and binge-watching Netflix in a fishing shack. He is the last of his kind, the last dragon, yet no amount of vodka can drown the loneliness in his molten core. I just found that part really interesting as far as what does the last dragon do in a modern world. The other two main characters are a young boy that actually has some legal issues with a particular police officer who turns out to be a little crooked. And so the boy finds himself being saved by this dragon and then pledges himself to him to be calls himself a familiar, but to be his helper with the modern world, kind of going to and from and running errands for him. And then this police officer tracking down this kid, and I think he ends up finding out about the dragon and wants to kill the dragon as well. Next up is the legendary Dune. I have tried to read this book a couple times before. I did it through an audiobook and just got really lost as far as they throw a lot at you. They do not, they don't hold their punches as far as terms and philosophies in these different groups and whatnot. So I got a physical edition. I got this gorgeous special edition. The inside covers have a real pretty landscape shot, and another one showing one of the worms famous for Dune. The inside of the jacket ends up looking like this as well. And so I just really fell in love with how this book looked. So Dune is the science fiction book that I'm trying to get to this month. I'm very excited to be reading that. We're going to be reading that just after we finish Highfire. Hopefully with that physical edition, I'll be able to actually kind of go back and forth and reread parts that I need to fully grasp what's going on. After Dune, we're going to be reading The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan, the first book in the Wheel of Time series. I did say in that yearly goal I wanted to be reading one Wheel of Time book every month. Last month, I didn't even crack this open, so we're going to really double down and focus on reading this series because there's a lot of books and they're real big, so it's going to take a ton of time to read through them. Every Brandon Sanderson fan that I know of has read the Wheel of Time series because Brandon Sanderson finished that and really enjoys it. So I want to read through it as well. Next is the next volume in the Vinland Saga. I'm really enjoying this series. The first volume goes through talking about the main character here, Thorfinn, and kind of gives a little bit of background on what's going on with him. You see that he has that vengeance pact with a particular person that he's working for, and then it jumps back to when he was a child and kind of shows how he got to that point. Then in the second volume, it continues on that story, but also talks about that main guy that he's having that vengeance pact with, and shares information about his backstory and where he's coming from, kind of shows his motives and shows that he's not necessarily as black and white as he originally showed. These books are really easy to read. I can get through one of these in a day, just the nature of it being a manga. But really enjoyed it. It's actually a really deep story so far, and from what I understand, it only gets better once you get further into the series. Next is 11/22/63 by Stephen King. I wanted to read one Stephen King book per month, probably until I finish all of his books. But this is the one that we had in our house. I haven't actually read this. I know the premise. Sounds really interesting. Time travel doesn't sound like it gets too crazy as far as what Stephen King is known for his crazy. Let me know if this is a book that I should probably hold off reading and start somewhere else with Stephen King's books. The big motive here is I want to read The Dark Tower, and I just want to read all the stuff to also catch the tie-ins to The Dark Tower, because I do know they have some direct tie-ins as the series goes on. The last book is The Far Empty by J. Todd Scott. This is a book that was lent to me by my coworker. Scott is a family member to her, and it's a kind of a modern Western crime story. The kind of like Longmire, if you've seen the show or read those books. So the book follows two main characters. One is a 17-year-old high school kid, and the other one is a new sheriff deputy. And they're in this little town on the Texas border, and eventually they find some skeletal remains. And so each of them kind of eventually come together, but are working this case separately, I guess. They're trying to find out what's going on in this little town. It sounds like they each are looking for evidence following this case, and they each come to the same suspect. The boy's father and his boss, the mayor of this town. So this is kind of like a on the back burner if I get through all these other books. Like I said at the beginning, finding time for reading is really hard, and I got some really big books to read. But if I get the time, I'm going to read through this book. It sounds interesting. I really enjoyed just show that's similar to this Longmire. So those are the books I'll be reading here in February. Let me know what you think. Let me know that Stephen King, if there's another book that I should be reading. And also comment down below if you know of any self-published books that are worth taking a look at. And while you're at it, don't forget to like and subscribe. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.